the ANC adopted this concept of the 4 pillars of struggle: mass movement, the underground, the armed struggle, and the international support. And it wasn't a question of either or. You can't separate them. You needed armed struggle to give people a sense of pride that they were fighting back.
The other, which gets forgotten, is that effectively the person who was commander-in-chief of MK for most of his life was OR.
When Mandela went abroad in 1962, to now brief OR to take him on board fully on the requirements of the armed struggle, and discusses the need now that in this situation we have to have a strong bond with the communist countries, the Soviet Union and other countries. Tambo says to Mandela, hey, and they used to call each other by their names from the 40s. He used to call Mandela Nell. He said, Nell, you've convinced me, but you've got to come, you've got to meet Adi and explain to her. Because he now knew that this thing is going to even take him away from London. And so one of the key reasons why Madiba went to London was to sit down and discuss this with Adelaide Tambo. OR had a great respect for women at a time when non-sexism was not yet even talked about.
Oliver was very fond of giving women courage to take up their part in the struggle. So he talked to us and guided us on what we should do, what we should not do, the policy of the organizations and so forth.
Various speeches, he said, we've always believed the oppressed must liberate themselves. So it's up to you women. What are you doing about it? You see? So that commission for the emancipation of women is what came back into the country.
But what was very important that he did is that he helped us to make the first conference, the first women's conference in exile.
And you will have noticed we're probably the only country in the world that has a constitution which says, lots of them say non-racial, but we say non-racial, non-sexist, democratic.
With OR, the primary one for us was political and the mobilization of the people, and that the guerrilla struggle would reinforce that and inspire the people and act psychologically against the regime. He paid great attention to it, and he used to get great pride and joy out of the blows that MK were able to strike. But he wanted to see the coming together of all these elements of the struggle.
I never saw Oliver as a man with a machine gun. It just wasn't his personality. And when he talked about the armed struggle, as he did often, one felt that there was a certain discomfort.
You find OR a quiet, almost self-effacing kind of person, and you have a picture of a commander, quite opposite. I think that that's also what made Comrade OR the best commander-in-chief.
He was never a pacifist. He supported it. It was a decision taken by the ANC. It was adopted ANC policy.
His role in the armed struggle sometimes is not fully appreciated, in part because of his personality, very peaceful and peaceable person. But there were instances where he would take charge in terms of the activities of Umkhonto weSizwe, and especially the unit that used to be called Special Operations, to ensure that some symbolic military activity takes place in order to drive home a particular political message.
We are going to move into an era of very bitter struggle in South Africa, in which many of the evils that have tormented Africa over the decades and even centuries are going to be resolved.
The first time he came through to me in a very distinctive Tambo way was at a meeting, I think it was 1967. Tambo comes up to the platform, and then he says, I've been asked by the National Executive of the ANC to announce that on such and such a date, the Luturi detachment of Umkhonto Wesi's were crossed over from Zambia into, I don't think it was called Zimbabwe then, meaning to find their way down to South Africa to launch the armed struggle there, or to continue with the armed struggle there. And they managed to evade detection for a number of weeks, but eventually there was a firefight, and he said, and it ended up, it lasted for several hours, with 3 of the enemy dead lying on the ground and no injuries to our brave fighters. And behind me, there's a voice, well-elocuted English voice, shouts, somebody standing up, "That's murder." We're all kind of shocked. That's murder. So I'm waiting for Tambo now to hit back. How dare this person speak like that? And Tambo steps aside, very quiet. He said, yes. He said, yes, we've become killers. Maybe one of the worst things that apartheid has done has been to force a young generation of South Africans who otherwise would have wanted to grow up to be doctors and engineers and nurses and farmers to become killers. I was stunned.
The strength of any organization lies in the caliber of its individual members and units. In order to advance in keeping with the momentum of our struggle, we must improve the quality and expand the quantity of our membership.
OR arrives in the camps, and all of us, of course, are waiting for OR to brief us. You could hear a pin drop as OR took us through from 1652 and why the ANC was formed in 1912 and why Umkhonto and everything and all the strategies.
Most of us, we didn't spend our youth here in South Africa, we spent it outside. The ANC, it was our mom, our dad. When they say you don't do this, you don't do that, you see. It's not like these young people of today. These ones, they are in discipline. They need OR to come and discipline them.
One day I get a phone call, Oliver Tambo on the line. He said, we have a problem. We have captured a number of agents sent by Pretoria to infiltrate and destroy the organization. And we have no regulations dealing with the conditions under which they have to be held. And he said, we use torture. The bleak face, quietly. I can't believe it. We're fighting for freedom. We use torture. And he asked me to draft a code of conduct to deal not only with captured enemy agents, but all sorts of problems that emerged inside the ANC. And he said, we are fighting for life. How can we be against life?
I remember in our younger days, Chris, few of us, frustrated by lack of progress coming back in South Africa, said to our chief, we would call him chief, we think we should seriously consider the hijacking of aeroplanes, civilian planes. And he said, well, who will be in those aeroplanes? He said, we know, it's mainly white people, who sit there and they are quite comfortable. That's why they are in those aeroplanes. They like what's going on. And so he said, what will it mean to the whole world that we are talking to? And they are white in Europe. There are people of all colors. And killing white people who are completely innocent of anything. I mean, it didn't rebuke us or anything, but it became very clear that we were to abandon the idea as quickly as we thought about it.
I was going to join MK, go to the camps, meet with other black consciousness people. We pick up the arms and come back and kill the Boers and live happily ever after. It didn't happen that easily, as you know.
If we had started throwing bombs into schools, randomly attacking civilians, in ways that happened in Algeria, for example, we would never have got a democratic South Africa. The polarization would have been so extreme that it would have been like a fight to the death. It would have ruined the country. Oliver Tambo said that in terms, felt that very, very deeply. And at the same time, his objection to terrorism, not only what it does to those who are hit by it, what it does to people who engage in those actions. You become an instrument of death. You're losing something, you're destroying part of your own humanity.